Today we're reviewing the Intel Core i9-10900X, a 10-core part from the Intel Core X paper launch that's supposed to tide us over until Intel has something actually new. Following the disappointing launch of the Intel 10980XE, which was thoroughly trounced by the cheaper and technically lower-end 3950X, the 10-core part will mostly stand up against Intel's own 9900K and AMD's R9 3900X. Considering we spent $600 retail for this part, and considering the cost of most X299 boards, a 3950X is also within the price range when totaling the board and CPU cost. There's a lot to talk about in today's 10900X review, but you probably have an idea of how it's going to go down. Before that, this video is brought to you by EVGA's RTX 2080 Ti XE Ultra. The 2080 Ti XE Ultra is what we use in our CPU reviews to avoid GPU bottlenecks. The XE Ultra uses hydraulic dynamic bearing fans for reduced noise, features RTX support for DXR titles, and uses a massive 2.75 slot cooler. The cooler design allows the fans to spin slower and quieter while sinking heat, further leveraging a mix of L-shaped and traditional fins to maximize airflow or contact. Learn more at the link in the description below. So we'll just start off with a disclaimer. In one of our recent news videos, someone said, the audio is a dumpster fire. Nope, just my voice right now, I'm sick. Sorry, deal with it. Although I appreciate the compliment, I guess. So for the 10900X, right out of the way, we should state the PCI-e lane difference is the primary reason anyone would actually consider this part. Because as we go through the performance results, you'll see that the 9900K makes a lot more sense for, well, gaming, and everywhere else it would make sense. And then basically anything from AMD at the high end makes more sense for a lot of the production stuff. But there are some interesting points for the 10900X nonetheless. As far as PCIe, you're looking at 48 for the CPU versus 16 for the 9900K. You're looking at 256 gigabytes of maximum memory capacity, which is noteworthy. More memory channels. Cache is up as well, but it's really the PCIe lane count and the memory support that you're paying for with the HEDT platforms. It's just that this is a low-end HEDT chip, which always gets to be kind of weird because there have been others of those before, like the 7740X, although that was even worse, much worse in a lot of ways, especially when you start looking at the memory configuration. Anyway, it's 3.7 gigahertz base for the 10900X, 4.5 gigahertz boost. We overclocked it, of course. Those numbers are going to be some of the most interesting because it's where Intel can actually claw back some performance. And the primary comparisons will be the 9900K for gaming from Intel. It's about $500 CPU, whereas the 10900X is about $600. There's the 3900X from AMD, which is about a $500 CPU. And then there's the 3950X from AMD, which is about $750 if you can find it. And that's really a lot of these, except the 9900K, are kind of hard to find right now. So let's get into the performance numbers, and we'll start with production. We'll get into games, and then talk about if there's instances where this thing makes sense. We'll start with some of our production benchmarks, as this is technically an HEDT CPU and not a mainstream socket. We'll talk gaming in the latter half of this review. For Adobe Premiere, our 1080p show floor render completed in about 3.6 minutes on the Intel 10900X, which marks it as about equal to the 9900KS stock CPU. The 3900X outperforms the 10900X, as does the 3950X. Overclocking the 10900X gets it to 3.2 minutes completion time, passing the 3900X stock and overclocked results, but being beaten by the 3950X stock results. With our 4K A-roll and B-roll render instead, the 10900X finishes in 10 minutes when stock, which has it just ahead of the 1950X and behind the 3900X. The 3900X CPU stock leads the 10900X by 11% or so, and overclock pushes the 10900X to a 13% render time reduction from its own stock performance levels, although the 3900X in this instance is better value and also really strong performance compared to the weak showing from the 10900X. Blender offers us a look at an application that leverages the threads more evenly across the CPU with less focus on frequency, although it's still beneficial, of course. Starting first with our GN Monkey Heads render, the Intel 10900X finishes the render in 16.6 minutes, which has it about tied with the 9900K at 5.2 gigahertz or the 1950X stock threader per CPU from 2017. Overclocking doesn't change much in this workload, pushing to 14.4 minutes and approaching 16-core 7960X levels of performance. The 3900X stock CPU completes the render in 23% less time than the stock 10900X, while being cheaper in both CPU and motherboard cost, while the 3950X completes the render in 39% less time. The GN logo render is more intensive, with the 10900X finishing in 19.7 minutes stock, or 17 minutes when overclocked. The stock 1950X does the same job in 16 minutes, illustrating the value of extra threads in Blender, and the 3900X does all of this in 15.6 minutes, illustrating the shared value of threads and IPC or higher frequencies as well in Blender. The 3900X completes the render in 21% less time than the stock 10900X, so it's just not even close. Photoshop is one Adobe product that still doesn't benefit much from high thread counts, or at least not past the 8-core 16-thread 9900K. Tested for filter, transform, scale, and a lot of other tasks in Photoshop, the average overall score for the 10900X was 970 points, with the 9900K and 3900X outperforming it in a similar fashion to the gaming tests. The 9900K is in particular scoring well at 1071 points stock, which is 10.4% ahead of the 10900X stock CPU, and it scored 1135 points overclocked to 5.1 GHz, 8.6% ahead of the 10900X at 5 GHz. That overclocked score for the 10900X was 1045 points, almost exactly tied with the 3900X stock CPU. Not all production workloads take advantage of more cores, and sometimes the more gamer-oriented desktop parts can beat the HEDT ones, as you see here. 7-zip is next, where we're looking at decompression and compression in that order. The decompression score for the 10900X was 93,000 MIPS, this time maintaining only a 9% advantage over the 9900K's average. Overclocking the 10900X to 5 GHz with a 30x mesh helped more than overclocking the 9900K to 5.2 GHz, with the gap widening in the OC results to a 14.6% advantage for the 10900X OC versus 9900K OC. The former of these scored 107,000 MIPS. None of these results came close to AMD's decompression score of 142,000 MIPS for the stock 3900X, or 148,000 MIPS with the 4.3 GHz all-core overclock. Compression testing is next. The Intel 10900X averaged 87,000 MIPS in the compression portion of the 7-zip benchmark, 30% ahead of the stock 9900K's 66,000 MIPS. The extra cores help, and this is a test where AMD Threadripper chips typically rule the high end. The 3900X with its 12 cores, 24 threads also outperforms the 10900X at 103,000 MIPS, a lead of about 19%. Overclocking the 10900X improves scoring by 8%, but 93,000 MIPS at 5 GHz is still significantly behind AMD's higher core count parts. The 10900X doesn't beat the 3900X and doesn't touch the 3950X at 122,000 MIPS. And given that the combined board plus CPU cost of the 10900X puts it into combined board plus CPU cost of the 3950X, that's really not a good thing for the Intel 10 core. Taken in combination with the decompression scores, the 3900X is well ahead of the Intel chips it's competing with here. V-Ray is the last of the production workloads before we get into our game benchmarks. This is another 3D render workload, but an extremely lightweight one compared to our Blender tests, allowing more of the test to fall within Intel's turbo durations when they apply. The 10900X required 56 seconds to complete, matching it with the 9900K at 5.2 GHz once again. That puts it below the 1920X stock CPU, although the 10900X overclock boosted performance to 46 seconds completion time. Performance here is just below the 1950X and stock R9 3900X, with the 3950X a distant leader. Moving on to the game testing, Shadow of the Tomb Raider is the first of two DX12 applications we currently test, and the 10900X had better relative performance here than in some of the other games. The 10900X stock CPU held 152 FPS average, 6.3% higher than the 3900X's 143 FPS average, although the 9900K remains king of the hill for gaming performance with an average of 170 FPS, or a lead of about 12% over the 10900X. Overclocking the 10900X gets it to 170 FPS average, functionally tying the stock 9900K CPU and hitting a point where we're nearing GPU limitations. In this instance, the 10900X doesn't provide value over the 9900K for gaming. The 3900X competes with it in production tasks and reasonably well here too, and the 9900K competes with it in gaming, primarily leaving the HEDT chipset and PCI-e lanes as the deciding factor for the 10900X. Hitman 2 is our next DX12 title. We preferred DX11 benchmarks for this game, but the audience really wanted DX12 back when we introduced this testing, despite overall worse performance. Anyway, at 1080p, the Intel 10900X hit 124 FPS average, just barely better than the 121 FPS average for the stock AMD R9 3900X. This would typically be the type of title that would benefit from a high core count because of all the AI simulation, but in terms of frame rate, the 9900K has both of the other CPUs beaten at 136 FPS average. That's a lead of about 10% over the 10900X. The Intel 10900X overclocks to 5 GHz averaged 19% higher than its stock result, bringing the average to 147 FPS and putting it near the top of the chart. Although the overclocked 10980XE still has it beaten when 100 MHz lower. As for the 9900KS at 5.2 GHz, that nearly matches the 10900X 5 GHz overclock, just for cheaper. At 1440p, the ceiling is dropped due to GPU constraints, clearly, and the 10900X ends up at 141 FPS average for its maximum performance when overclocked to 5 GHz. That allows it a lead over the 9900K at 5.1. Stock performance has the 10900X equivalent to the 3950X, both at 124 to 125 FPS average. With the 9700K and 9900K stock CPUs both technically outperforming these two parts, there's not really a strong argument for the 10900X in this game, as is probably expected. Civilization turn time benchmarks are next, moving away from FPS and toward a different type of game performance metric. For this one, the Intel i9-10900X stock CPU takes 32.8 seconds per turn to process, which has it equal with the AMD R9 3900X and worse than the stock Intel 9900K at 29.7 seconds. The 9900K finishes in about 9.5% less time. The 10900X CPU is marginally better than the 8700K and equal to the 10980XE stock CPU. Overclocking the 10900X to 5 GHz gets it a time reduction of 12% from the stock performance, getting it near the top of the charts. The thing is, though, that an overclocked 9900K is functionally equal to this performance, so Intel hasn't really gained any ground against itself here. F1 2018 is next, giving us a Directx 11 title to look at. We like this one for its high ceiling before GPU limits are hit, allowing us a unique look at frame time pacing between CPUs. The 10900X under stock settings hit 282 FPS average, which has it roughly tied with the 10980XE. The extra cores are obviously not leveraged here, like in most games, and the frequency deficit costs performance to the point of being worse than an Intel i5-9600K stock CPU and its 284 FPS average. Most importantly, the frame time consistency takes a dive on the HEDT Intel CPUs, where we see the 9600K producing more reliable frame time performance, and that likely has to do with scheduling. The 3900X stock CPU lands at about 276 FPS average, allowing the 10900X a technical lead, and the 9900K leads at 313 FPS average when stock. In percentages, the lead over the 10900X stock CPU is 11% for the 900K stock CPU. Overclocking the 10900X gets it into more of a leadership position, but still not one that can beat the 9900KS overclock. Moving to 1440p for F1 chops the top off the performance numbers, landing the 10900X stock CPU at roughly 221 FPS average, down near the 3950X and i5-7600K. Overclocking promotes more frames, keeping things at 240 FPS, but there's still no appeal over a cheaper 9900K for this gaming workload. GTA 5 is next. At 1080p, GTA 5 has the 10900X at 100 FPS average, resting in its proper place between the stock 9980XE at 95 FPS average and stock 10980XE at 103 FPS average. Although the other two processors are 18-core 36-thread compared to the 10900X's 10-core 20 threads, this is irrelevant to many games. That's especially including GTA 5. The determining factor is max turbo in this title at least, and according to that metric, this stack makes sense. With that in mind, the much more gaming-focused 9900K stomps all over the HEDT chips with an average of 122 FPS. Even the 3900X scored 110 FPS average, allowing a lead over the 10900X stock CPU. It's still a strange experience to see AMD taking the lead in frequency-dependent stock tests, but the 3900X is also much closer to peak gaming performance right out of the box, as the relatively low gains from overclocking show. The 10900X clocked to 5 GHz managed a 20% uplift to 119 FPS average, while the 3900X's performance rose just 2.8% with an overclock up to 113. And there's a whole different discussion to be had on memory tuning for Ryzen 3000, but we had that in a different video. The 9900K at 5.1 GHz tops the chart for non-LN2 overclocking with an average of 132 FPS, while maintaining an equally impressive 79 FPS average for the 0.1% lows. GTA 5 stack at 1440p is much the same as 1080p, with mostly the same FPS averages. This is a CPU-bound test even at 1440p for the CPUs that we're talking about mostly today. The 10900X still shows significant uplift from overclocking from 100 to 120 FPS average, which is a mixed benefit. On the one hand, you have some headroom to improve performance, which is nice and makes for fun enthusiast tasks, but on the other hand, you're paying for CPUs that run below peak performance out of box. The 10900X outperforms the 3900X when overclocked here, but not stock to stock. Either way, the 9900K beats both CPUs with a 122 FPS average for the stock result alone. Total War's campaign test creates greater deltas between CPUs than the battle benchmark and can sometimes shake up the stack. The 10900X averaged 133 FPS stock, and although the 3950X and 3900X remained ahead, its advantage narrowed to 5.4% with a 140 FPS average. Overclocking gave the 10900X a big boost once again at 159 FPS average and a jump of 20% over stock performance. That said, the frame times are all over the place now, which illustrates a stability issue with these settings. This could be better tuned by dropping 100 MHz off the clock, but then you're also losing some performance in other games where it's stable. Versus the 3900X's 145 FPS when overclocked, the 10900X maintains an advantage in OC headroom if stability can be achieved. The 9900K averaged 179 FPS, vastly beyond the rest of the CPUs listed here, although again, this is a specific game where we see problems appear on higher core count CPUs. So far, it's looking like the 10900X is in the same category as the 7740X, the low end of the high end, and is more expensive but not necessarily better than products further down the stack. The second of our two Total War benchmarks takes place on the battle rather than the campaign map for a more intensive but somewhat less CPU-bound benchmark. The stock 10900X averaged 143 FPS in the battle benchmark with the lows that were overall good. The 3900X averaged 159 FPS, 11.3% ahead of the stock 10900X. Overclocking the 10900X had mixed results again with this title, with a consistently bad 1% and 0.1% low that had an average FPS that was still 7.8% beyond the stock result. This is a title that typically doesn't respond well to high core counts, illustrated by the 9980XE being all over the place, and the 8-core 16-thread 9900K's ability to beat the higher core count CPUs that we're comparing today by sometimes a lot. So unfortunately, the 10900X is just sort of, I always have to be careful with this phrase and when I use it. So it's not a bad CPU in an objective sense, but it's bad in the comparative sense. You should buy the 9900K if you care about gaming. It's a 10-core part, but you're still dealing with Intel's HEDT architectures, and mesh can cause a bit of an issue there. The clocks are obviously the bigger issue there. So for Intel to start competing in desktop, meaning non-HEDT, the lower end of the two, it will need probably a 10-core part. It will need something like this. It's going to need that part at 9900K frequencies, and that doesn't exist right now. So the 10-core part was the one that we hoped would be sort of a bit of a saving grace for Intel just to keep things interesting, because presently it's been the same story for Intel since the 9900K came out, which is that, well, okay, best for gaming, buy it for gaming only, buy it if you're an FPS snob, whatever. You know the story. That hasn't changed. There's not a new part, and that's not the 9900K is becoming an old part. So kind of boring. The end all for this is if you're playing games and that's all you're doing, buy the 9900K, don't buy this. If you are planning to render things with applications like those we've shown today, and the PCI-e lanes are not really that much of a consideration for you, or a consideration at all beyond a GPU and maybe an SSD, then the 3900X would be the lower cost, as in $500, still expensive, but it's cheaper than this, than the 10900X. 3900X would be the lower cost choice. The 3950X, once you start factoring in motherboard costs, really not that different from the 10900X, assuming you can find it in stock. Kind of also a paper launch, really. AMD should be kind of knocked for that, but they're splitting their silicon a lot of different ways. Intel is splitting its silicon the same ways it always has. It's just run out of silicon. But if the 3950X is in stock, it's really hands down the better CPU versus the 10900X in pretty much every single instance. So we'd much prefer that purchase, and with the board costs combined with the CPU, it's about the same. So then, the choices are everything except for this one. This is basically what we're saying. 9900K, sure, whatever. If that's what you like to do, gaming's it, go buy that. Production, go buy 3900X or 3950X. And PCI-e lanes, maybe. There starts to be an argument here, but there's still cheaper alternatives from previous generations if you just want PCI-e lanes. And a lot of those CPUs are on sale these days. So just not quite able to find a good defensible position for the 10900X. And that's going to be it for this one. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. You'll want to catch our, whatever, I'll leave it there. It fell over. You'll want to catch our disappointment build coming out soon. It has some, Intel makes an appearance. So check back for that. Subscribe. Go to store.gamersnexus.net to help us out directly, or patreon.com/gamersnexus. And we'll see you all next time.